Hi folks, we're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the concept of abuse of power and by extension from that, the abuse of power leading to premeditated, orchestrated attempts at public humiliation. Now, if we look at the behaviour of the Justice Department when controlled by the deep state and by, the Biden administration, not that Biden knew what he was doing one day to the next, but the deep state controllers, his handlers, the use of the Justice Department to engage in acts of public humiliation of people they didn't like, not people who necessarily broken the law, or if there was any law breaking, it was a misdemeanor or a very strangled interpretation of law breaking, but the act of public humiliation. If we look at the lawfare against Donald Trump, one of probably the key thing they were trying to achieve was his public humiliation. And if we look at the cases of Fani Willis in Georgia, Letitia James and Alvin Bragg in New York, the Judge Merchant in New York, the Jack Smith investigations or supposed alleged investigations, the raid on Mar-a-Lago, all these sorts of things, the constant stream of information being leaked to the media, all for the purpose of publicly humiliating Donald Trump. There was little, if any, legal justification for this, and things they could have quite easily have done quietly and without fuss or drama were instead ginned up to the max with maximum drama, leaks to the media, the raid on Mar-a-Lago, for example. None of that was necessary, and again, all orchestrated and so on. So this is an abuse of power. Now we can look at there's many abuses of power, but the corruption and perversion of the organs of state, in this case, the Justice Department, and the legal apparatus of the state. This is, in my view, a very clear and flagrant abuse of power. And again, the purpose is, if not to secure a conviction in kangaroo courts, and there was certainly that, but most importantly was to engage in hysterical acts of public humiliation of Donald Trump and the people around him, public humiliation and attacks on people that may have been protesting the very suspicious presidential election of 2020. Now, public humiliation is in my view, an indication of an abuse of power at any level, and not simply in the abuse of the federal legal infrastructure, but also it could be in a business or a boss you've got at work and so on. And when you're climbing or attempting to climb the greasy corporate pole, you often come across people who manage bosses who try to use public as in within the organization in front of your peers and colleagues, public humiliation to put you in your place. They want to get off on it, or they want to feel tough or in control, and there can be all sorts of reasons, personal reasons. Prison guards who are particularly brutal to the inmates and so on. These are abuses of power. Now oversight, as in some sort of supervisory oversight, can limit or restrict that. But it's still there, and I recall you'd be at the big meeting. There'd be 20 people in the room, and the boss, whoever it is, the mere fact that a meeting is being called without any particular reason, or the reasons are so sort of vague that that it's some sort of a setup, or you're walking down the corridor in the office and the boss spots you. Oh, Billy Bob, you got a minute? Just a minute. Just a quick talk. And you walk into the office, and there's a whole bunch of people there, the corporate lawyer, and it's an ambush. They've ambushed you. So there's also the ambush factor tied within the humiliation factor. They've got to sort of set it up. Now we look at, say, the Donald Trump supporter Roger Stone, where he's a man in his late 60s, and they decide to do an FBI SWAT team, body armor, automatic weapons raid on this old man's house at 5 o'clock in the morning. The media's tipped off with the cameras already. That was a ritual public humiliation of Mr. Stone, and as there have been in raids and humiliations of people involved, say Christians, where again there's a Christian guy who's never been accused of a crime of any sort, and yet there's a SWAT team with body armor and again automatic weapons and the whole thing arrive at his house and to engage, again, media in tow, to engage in acts of public humiliation. So now this is an abuse of power, and clearly some of the agents involved and the people who sign off on it are getting off on this. We have all this power. Let's use it. Let's use it to humiliate these people. And now those who were infected with this inclination, again, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Fani Willis, who were inclined or were filled with this inclination to abuse power on the basis of I want to publicly humiliate someone I don't like or don't agree with, or even though there's no basis. And by the way, I can use taxpayer dollars to indulge my fantasies of humiliation. And you see this sort of ritual going on in, say, the divorce courts. Men are often publicly humiliated in court, not because they committed a crime, just for ideological reasons. Now, these are abuses of power, and oversight should stop them. Now, there's a limit, I guess, often placed on people in the private sector, because if you're in a competitive marketplace, then you can't engage in those sorts of rituals without it starting to have an effect on company morale. You can't keep high quality, effective people, or you can't attract them. So at some point, that the abuse of power, and we're using the example of humiliation here, but the abuse of power will stop, because that person will lose their job. So now I remember, if we look at abuses of power, it can become quite petty, and again, the pursuit of public humiliation is, if anything, petty. I remember that there was a few guys that were convicted of some sort of fraudulent behaviour in Australia, and there was an orchestrated attempt to humiliate them, again, coordinated with the media. So, the judge declared that, Jimmy Jack was going to have to do a couple of years in prison or something like that. So Jimmy Jack's in handcuffs and he's being led away, but someone in the group said, look, we'll go down this way here, rather than just go straight to the cells or the waiting, prison van's going to take the guy to prison. So instead of that, they say, no, let's walk down here. Let's walk down this way. What reason are we walking down this way? Is because there's a series of open doors, or there's an open door area where they want to parade the prisoner in handcuffs past to the waiting media who are going to take photographs. So the cops or the prison guards, whoever it is, lead the guy around in this sort of down these corridors, and there's an open door, and they tell him stop there. So he stops, and the guards stand back, and then suddenly there's a call, "Hey, Jimmy Jack!" And it's a media guy there with the media's there with the cameras and so on. So he looks up in surprise. Bingo, gotcha. And then that's the front page picture. Jimmy Jack Smith, found guilty of fraud or whatever it was. But now they've got the public humiliation photo. And I've noticed how often the authorities do this, the deliberate humiliation of a prisoner, to publicly humiliate them. Now, I regard that as an abuse of power. look, that they've been decided, it's just been decided they're guilty in a court, they're going to, go to prison or serve whatever sentence it might be, but instead they want that public humiliation and they set it up and do it. So this is very much a tactic used against anybody that they want to, let's publicly humiliate this guy, and this and this is an abuse of power in my view. Now, I've even I remember the first sort of job I think I ever had as I was still a kid at high school, in the summer holidays and the Christmas summer holidays break, and if the boss was very insecure, I didn't understand it fully at the time. I was sort of too young to get it. I was like 14 of them. The boss was a very insecure guy in his 40s, and he's like the warehouse manager, and I'm just a flunky who's carrying cartons back and forth and that sort of thing. So, but if he wanted to feel big and tough, he would try and publicly humiliate one of the employees in front of the others. He wouldn't do it privately. He would do it in front of everyone else, and he clearly got off on this. And again, this is an abuse of power. Now, there's a type of insecurity that's needed in, I think, a person who would want to do that. If I wanted to, as a boss, if I wanted to, give some, like, tell somebody, hey, you're just not doing the job. What's wrong? Why are you fucking things up? And I would do it privately. I wouldn't do it in front of anyone else, because the idea of humiliating them in front of someone else or other people or a group, even if it was in a meeting where I would, somebody was maybe misbehaving at the meeting or something, not contributing or not fessing up to their responsibilities or something, I wouldn't deal with it in front of everyone else. It would embarrass them, humiliate them, and would put a degree of resentment in them that you don't want that. You want them to so I would take them and privately talk about it and try and work something out with them. But the idea of a public humiliation thing. Now, I've had a number of bosses over the years that have done the public humiliation. I recall an MD of a company where I was having a meeting with the like the departmental managers, and I was the VP sort of thing, and having a meeting, and he just appeared at the door like, I want everyone out. I want you working, not sitting around talking. And so I said, this is a scheduled meeting. I don't care. And that sort of just undermined my authority and as that's the manager. And so it created a degree of difficulty that I then had to contend. But I tried to talk to him about it. Why did you do that so publicly? If you didn't like the idea of that meeting being on, why didn't you talk to me about it later? You could have waited till the meeting was over and asked me about it, and then said, look, I'd rather you didn't do that, or this is how I want you to do it, or do it at different times, or so on and so forth. And but why do I have to do that? I'm your boss, not the other way around. This sort of thing. So when we look at abuse of power, then the need to humiliate others, I think, comes from a fairly deep sort of insecurity and sense of inadequacy and so on, that and people coming to the idea of those who should have the right to exercise, be given the authority to exercise power, if they manifest or display that sort of insecurity, then should they be given any power or allowed to hold power? And if they are somehow in positions of power, should they have strict oversight? Now, if we look at the characters involved of Fani Willis, and looking at the way she talks, behaves, things, so on, you wouldn't let her, you wouldn't give her the power to flip burgers in a McDonald's. The way she behaves. Letitia James, I would argue, in New York is the same. Alvin Bragg, I would argue, is the same, and Jack Smith the same, and the people that coordinate with them to tip the media off, again, to engage in the public humiliation. It's not just them, it's the people around them and the people who are signing off on what they're doing. Just if you look at the taxpayer expenditure, the money they spent on pursuing Donald Trump through the courts, again, for the idea, I think, of more than anything, just publicly humiliating him. was in taxpayer terms, there's well over 100 million in taxpayer dollars was spent on this. Jack Smith alone was pushing $50 million. Now, some of this is people already on the payroll, and the infrastructure that was used was already there. But if you cost that out, that would be the so it's not a net new cost, but rather a use of infrastructure that had already existed, and the use of that infrastructure cost over $100 million. You look at Nathan Wade, Fani Willis's boyfriend. As I understand it, he was paid over $500,000 to do what? So this is the idea. But then there was no oversight on Fani Willis to do this. She was given a budget to spend money on cases that had accrued over COVID, and instead arbitrarily and unilaterally decided to spend that money going after Trump. But people had to sign off on that. People had to agree to that. There are those who we want to humiliate him, and through humiliating Trump, we can prevent him being a force in politics. But this is an abuse of power, and we need to understand that not only is it an abuse of power, but it's an abuse of power exercised and practiced by certain people that shouldn't have power. And that perhaps is the bigger issue here. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.